Welcome back to Mastering MMA. I'm Coach Lee here with you today. We're going to be talking about being a specialist versus being well-rounded and the pros and cons to both. So when we're talking about fighting MMA, you can be a specialist, like you can be a stand-up specialist or a ground specialist, or you can get like really specific at that too. So what I mean by that is, in general, you're going to be better at one thing or the other, stand-up or grappling in general. So what I mean by that is, to be a specialist is you're not a little bit better, you're way better at one or the other. And then when I talk about getting even more specialized, that's to where you do one very specific thing great. So I'll give you some examples here. So if I'm talking about a ground specialist, you would think, say, Demian Maia, right? Stand-up is not great, to say the least, but it's gotten way better. But especially when he first came into the UFC, his stand-up was horrible, but his ground game was amazing. So, he could, if he could get at the ground, it was pretty much over the guys he was fighting at that point. So, that's a specialist. You could also say Anderson Silva when it comes to striking, right? He was a striking specialist. He was great at striking. And I'm not saying he was a slouch on the ground by any means. He had a very respectable ground game, but his stand-up, he specialized in that. That's what he was feared for. That's what he was known for. That was his specialty, was his stand-up, right? So that's how you can be a specialist. And then when we start talking about very specific things, it's people that attack certain things and hit them very frequently to finish fights. We could use, say, Ryan Hall with his 50-50 leg locks, or his triangles for that matter. He's got piles of finishes with triangles also. Or you could talk about, say, Connor's left hand, right? He's that's kind of his thing. Is he drops people with it. So that's some examples of what I'm talking about here. So then you run into, is it better to be well-rounded or a specialist? And there's pros and cons to both. So let's say we are well-rounded. So the pros of that is we can pretty much kind of go anywhere with anybody and feel comfortable there, or anybody on our level, if that makes sense. And be comfortable there, right? They might be better than us, but they're not going to be light years better than us in general, unless they're very good at whatever they specialize in. So that's the big pro to that is you're well-rounded, you feel comfortable everywhere. So the downside to that would be is if you do run into a specialist, say you're pretty well-rounded, but you run into a striker who is just light years beyond you. So if that's the case, like, you can't stand with him. Everywhere else, you might be better everywhere else but that one spot, right? So the disadvantage is, if that striker can keep it a striking thing, you're in for a long fight, or a short one, depending on how it plays out. But either way, it's not going to be a good situation for you, right? The odds are against you at that point. So on the flip side of that coin, if you're a specialist, you've got to kind of keep the fight around your specialty where you have the better chance to win. So say, well, we just use a specialized striker as an example. Let's say you're a ground guy, specializing in the ground game, right? And you're going up against a well-rounded guy. You have to get that well-rounded guy to the mat, right? To start to play your game that you specialize in. In general, and the way this plays out, some of it's just the way you're drawn towards it and the way you learn and stuff. But in general, for you to be a specialist, your other stuff has to lack because you're not putting the same amount of time into that. If you want to get really good at something, you've got to dedicate a lot of time to it. So if you want to be a really good striker, usually your ground game's going to suffer, or your takedowns are going to suffer, or something to that nature. Or if you want to be really good on the ground, usually your striking's going to suffer because you're spending more time on the ground, training that. And that's kind of, in general, how you become a specialist is you're spending a lot more time on the one thing. And so that's kind of how that plays out. So in general, if you're the ground specialist, most of the time, and you're going up against a well-rounded guy, they're going to be a better striker. Might not be light years ahead of you, but they're going to be better in general. If you've kind of trained the same amount of time, and they've done more well-rounded training where you've tried to specialize in one specific thing. So you've got to figure out how to get that fight to the ground, or else you're at a disadvantage, right? But the situation might be as soon as you get to the ground, they are done, right? You're just that good because you've specialized in it. So that's kind of the pros and cons to each. Now my theory on training is I want all my guys to be pretty well-rounded, but I also encourage them to focus a little more on what they're good at. I make them do the stuff they're bad at. I make them do a lot of it. But on their off time, right, I encourage them to focus on one specific thing. And I encourage them to get very specific about it. Whether it's a set of footwork that I want them, to add to their game that's working towards, say they got a big right hand, right? So it might be a specific set of a specific type of footwork to get you in a certain position to drop that hammer. Or it might be a specific submission that that we're working on getting to. One of my guys is great with arm bars, and like he finishes a lot of arm bars. And I told him one day, I was like, in classes, like do everything, get better at everything. I was like, on your own time, like find a million ways to get to that arm bar, right? Because that's what you're good at. That's what you're finishing fights with. Train everything, but spend a little bit of extra time getting to the point where you can finish the fight. So, and that being said, like I don't want him skipping out on other stuff to do that. Train your wrestling, train your grappling, train your stand-up. On your off time, focus on that armbar, right? When you're at open gym and you're just rolling, focus on that armbar. Find that armbar from every position you could possibly think of. And then once you've found it from every position you can think of, go do some research and see who else has found other positions to get there from. And that gives you that instant way to finish the fight, right? If you get anywhere close to that, like you've got a good shot at winning the fight. So that's a nice tool to have there. But at the same time, I don't want my guys feeling out of place anywhere. I don't want them to feel like, oh no, this guy's a wrestler, I'm screwed. Or, oh no, this guy's a good striker, what am I going to do? Right? I want my guys to be able to go with the guys that are on their level but excel at something they're not good at. I don't want them to feel completely uncomfortable in that spot going against the guy that's his good attribute, right? So say the guy I'm referring to with the armbar, say he's going up against a good striker. I don't want him to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to get it to the ground right away or I'm getting knocked out, right? I want him to be comfortable enough that he can go in there with that good striker, right? He might not be the better striker, and he might eat some big shots, right? But he's going to give some, right? He might eat a little more than he gives. But if we can do that, it's going to make the takedown to the ground a lot easier, right? If all the armbar guys worried about is getting that takedown, it becomes obvious, and it makes it a lot easier to defend. So that's why I encourage my guys, like, get into every aspect of your game and try to improve on every aspect constantly, just a little bit. But spare time, focus on what you're good at, right? Become great at that. But don't do it to the detriment of your other stuff. So obviously, you're not going to be able to train extra on everything. But you can still train all your stuff that everybody else is doing. But when you have that free time that's just yours, open gym, whatever, then drill your arm bars or whatever you're good at. I'm just using that as an example. And actually, I'll give you a little story about myself. So I had been grappling for a long time. This was actually after my fighting was over. And Jen, my girlfriend, she was in the hospital, and she had to be there for quite a while because of some back issues, and had to have some serious surgeries. So since she was in the hospital, I was in the hospital a lot, and just being there with her. So I had a lot of downtime, and in my downtime, I was trying to figure out, like, what could I do to improve my grappling? Like, what's the spot I feel like I can advance the most? And that's when I decided to look into leg locks. And I had finished plenty of leg locks before. I'd actually finished leg locks in fights, in MMA fights. But I felt like that was the place I could grow the fastest. Like there was the most room to just take in knowledge. Other than just minor details, but there was some big gaps in there I could close up. So I focused on it, and I spent, I'd say, probably a good 4 months where, like, I was obsessed with leg locks, whether it was finishing them or transitions to get to them. But my extra training was focused on leg locks. I was still, teaching all my classes and all that stuff. I was still doing private sessions, and I wasn't showing any leg lock stuff in that, right? I was still doing my normal stuff in that, while I focused on my leg lock stuff and improving my leg lock game. And it got to the point where I could, like, in my gym, I could leg lock people at will, right? It didn't matter. Like, as soon as we touched hands, if your foot came close to me, I could find a leg lock. So then I backed off of it, right? I got pretty good at that, and I backed off of it. And at this point, my leg locks is probably my second best submission attack, behind my triangles. But that's because I focused on it. But even while I was focused on that, like, I was still training wrestling. I was still training my striking. I wasn't letting my other stuff slack because of it. But my spare time, I was really just focused in on my leg locks. And it allowed me to bring my leg lock game up very rapidly, as opposed to, like, small steps at a time. So I guess what I'm getting at here is, when you're starting out new, get your bases down, right? Get all your basic positions down, your basic submissions down, get all that stuff down, and then kind of see what you're drawn to, right? And keep improving to be a better, more well-rounded fighter, whether it's stand-up or grappling. But then whatever you're good at, whether it's a triangle or a hook or an uppercut or leg locks or head kicks, whatever it is that you find yourself drawn to and excelling at the fastest, put a little extra focus into that, once you've kind of got your base down and you feel like you know the bases of things, put a little extra effort into what you're good at and let that grow a lot faster, and your confidence will build off of that. And that'll, when you know you've got that ace in your hand, right? Whether it's the head kick or the triangle, whatever it is, when you know you've got that ace in your hand, it'll allow you to open up more, right? You'll feel more confidence. Everything kind of starts to gain off of that. Now, with that being said, like, once you feel like you've gotten to the point where, like, you're just using it at will, like, back off of it for a while. Take a couple months away from it. Avoid it, right? Because it will get to the point where, like, you see it constantly everywhere, whether it's a head kick or a leg lock or whatever it is. Back off of it for a while and find something else to work on, right? Whether you go back to just focusing on one specific thing, or if you want to just spend time just being well-rounded, right? Maybe even go work on something, a hole in your game. But then after a couple months, come back to it and refresh it, right? And get to the point where it's right back, boom, 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 and then take some time away from it. And it will get better even when you're not focused on it, right? You'll get better at it because you're still doing it, but try to avoid it, right? Don't get to the point where you are hitting the same thing every time. And I actually talked to one of my athletes about that this weekend, and we talked about how I showed him something and it clicked for him, and he was destroying people with it, and I made him back off of it. Like, when he was training and I would see him start to go for it, I would tell him no, like, don't do that, right? Because I wanted him to work something else so he had other options. And that really expanded his game, right? It gave him all new submissions. And now it's to the point where when he goes for that he was dominating people with, if they start to defend, he switches quick to something else and starts attacking something else immediately. Now, sometimes he hits his counterattack and finishes right away, but a lot of times they defend that, and he ends up going right back to what he wanted in the first place because they're no longer defending that, and puts him in a great spot where he's very dominant at. So that's kind of my outlook on the specialist versus the well-rounded fighter. Definitely hit the like button for me here and let me know what you think. Are you more of a specialist type of fighter, or are you more of a well-rounded type of fighter? Let me know about that. Let me know if you think it's better to be a specialist or a well-rounded fighter. And if you're new, are you kind of gearing yourself to be a specialist or a well-rounded fighter? So if you could do that for me, I would appreciate that. I like to see what you all are getting into and how things are working out for you. If you haven't yet, hit that like button for me. Share on social media. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit that notification bell. Less than half of my viewers are subscribed, so I know a lot of y'all are watching this and aren't subscribed. So hook me up with that subscriber. It'll help me get a little bit closer to my goals on the channel. So that would be greatly appreciated. And we will catch you next time on Mastering MMA with Coach Lee.